Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I am your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Paul Shapiro on the podcast. He is the co-founder and CEO of the Better Meat Company. This is a really interesting episode because we dig into Paul's career as a lobbyist for the Humane Society before writing a book and then before launching and starting his own business, the Better Meat Company, which is a meat replacement or meat ingredient company that he started in Sacramento, California back in 2018. So I think you get a lot out of this episode, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're thinking about starting a business. So let's get Paul on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Paul, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being a guest.
Justin, thanks so much. Great to be with you, man.
Yeah, well, let's jump right in. Give everybody that's watching and listening a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
Well, you're finding me in Sacramento, California, which is where I both live and work. I run a company called the Better Meat Co., which I started 8 years ago. And basically, the premise of the company is that we are not getting any more land to farm. Humanity's numbers keep growing, but the planet does not get any bigger. Humanity's footprint on the planet gets a lot bigger, but the planet itself remains the same size. And so we have about 8.4 billion of us on the planet today. We're scheduled to get up to about 10 billion within the next 25 years. And there's just not really that much more land to farm to feed all these people. And so we need to get a lot more efficient. We need to be able to produce more food from less land. And the best way to do that is to reduce our reliance on animals for food, because animals take up a huge amount of land, water, and other resources in order to produce meat, eggs, and milk. And so what we do is, instead of going big with animal agriculture, we're going small with microbial agriculture to grow microbial fungi, sometimes known as mycelium, or the root-like structure of fungi, into ingredients that can not only taste great, but be cost-effective and be a whole food in an all-natural state that's been consumed by humanity for centuries, but has more protein than eggs, more iron than beef, more zinc than beef, more potassium than bananas, more fiber than oats. It's a real superfood. And we call that mycelium. And that mycelium forms the basis of what we grow here at the Better Meat Co.
And so for people that aren't familiar with any of the mycelium and all those words that you just said outside of eggs and meat and dairy and all that fun stuff, what is it? How does it work? And then we'll dig into the business side of it and all that fun stuff.
Sure. So most people are familiar with the various kingdoms of life, right? You've got animals and you've got plants, but those are not the only two kingdoms. There are other kingdoms, one of which is fungi. Too often we think about fungi and plants as being the same thing, but they are not. In fact, fungi are much closer to animals than either is to plants. So just as an example, Justin, think about fungi. We breathe in oxygen. We animals breathe in oxygen. And plants, as everybody knows, breathe out oxygen, right? They breathe in CO2, they breathe out oxygen, the opposite of us. Well, fungi are so much more like animals that they breathe in oxygen and they breathe out CO2. Similarly, plants just put themselves in the sun to photosynthesize, whereas animals have to actually go out and find food and digest it. Well, that's the same thing with fungi. They have to find food and digest it. This is why plants are green typically, and mushrooms never are, because mushrooms don't use chlorophyll or photosynthesis. So the point is just to suggest that fungi are very different from plants, and they're far more similar to animals than they are to plants. And so if you want to take fungi, but not mushrooms, again, the root-like structure of fungi, often known as mycelium, you can take that, and mycelium has been consumed by humans for many, many millennia. But there are some types of mycelium that you can grow which have an extraordinarily meat-like texture and an amazing nutritional profile. So when I say it has more protein than eggs, it also is a complete protein, meaning it has all the essential amino acids. That is unlike most plant protein sources like pea protein or wheat protein and so on, which are not so-called complete proteins, typically speaking. But mycelium is. It's a complete protein, all the essential amino acids, and it tastes amazing. And unlike many of the products that are on the market today, this is not only not processed. This is an all natural whole food, right? This is a completely natural whole food that we can grow, and it can satiate your meat tooth very easily because it tastes great.
Yeah, I was thinking it's interesting. We talked about this kind of in the green room a couple week or two ago that you're not trying to make a better Beyond Burger or something like that. You're effectively, and you gave me a stat, and I'd like you to share it. That you're essentially trying to carve out half or part of the beef that's in a beef patty and make it mycelium, which would actually save a lot of animals' lives versus just trying to shift people from eating a beef burger into eating a Beyond Burger or plant-based burger. Can you frame that up again? Because I thought that was kind of fascinating how you're not trying to create this, Beyond company, Beyond Meat company. You're trying to create something that could actually kind of ease people into eating more plants in their diet without really knowing it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Justin. We're an ingredients company, right? We make a mycelium ingredient, and we're not trying to compete with Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods. We're an ingredients company. Frankly, I'd like to sell to Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods and help them make even better products. At the same time, the primary use for our mycelium is not to make plant-based meat. It's to enhance actual animal meat. So you can imagine having a burger that instead of being solely beef is, let's say, 1/3 mycelium, 2/3 beef from a cow. In that case, you get a burger that not only is more cost effective for you, but you get a burger that has way less saturated fat, way less cholesterol, and fewer calories. Then it tastes great in addition. So imagine having a burger that tastes better, is better for you. Of course, it's better for the planet and animals, but it's also more effective for your pocketbook. That is how we help companies make better meat, is by offering an ingredient that does it for them.
And are there examples of this in the market, right? Are there products that somebody could go to a Whole Foods or, an HEB in Texas or something like that, where they can see a burger that is 100% beef, but then a burger next to it that's 80% beef, 20% mycelium?
Yeah.
And I'm curious just about the economics of it, right? Is it cheaper? Is it, and how does it taste? Because obviously, being being non-vegan and then being vegan, people always say like, hey, meat replacement or meat alternative products don't taste anywhere near like the real thing. And so I'm just kind of curious, is it cheaper? Is it something that is similar in taste? Would people know, et cetera?
Sure. So it really depends on what you mean by the so-called real thing, right? So, different meats taste different from one another, right? Chicken doesn't taste like beef and fish doesn't taste like crab. So it depends on what you think of as the so-called real thing. Now, at the same time, to answer your question directly, yeah, we're in the market. So whether it's plant-based companies like Oshi Salmon, so Oshi is a plant-based salmon company. You can buy their products all over the country in the United States. That's made with our mycelium. We also are sold in restaurants in Northern California, both as a hybridizing agent in meat and as a plant-based meat substitute as well. You mentioned HEB. This isn't our product, but in Texas and HEB, they do sell a fungi-infused burger from a company called Fable Foods that you can also check out, which is a pretty cool combination of 50% beef, 50% fungi. So those are some examples of where people can get this, and people prefer the taste, right? When you do blind taste tests of these products, people prefer the enhanced burgers. It is better. It actually tastes better. The mycelium has an umami flavor that gives you a burst of flavor that is not present in a solely beef product. And then when you consider that it's actually more cost effective, a lot of people like it for that reason too.
So how did the business start? Like obviously, looking at your career and your background, you've had a very long career at the Humane Society, very kind of policy driven on animal welfare and everything. And so I'm just curious, kind of how you grew up. I'm always curious about people's origin stories and how they get into entrepreneurship and build businesses. But you kind of have a unique case where you spent 13 years at the Humane Society and then built a business and all that. So maybe walk us through a little bit of the origin and then how did your business kind of grow 8 years ago?
Yeah, I grew up really liking animals and I couldn't stand the thought of people being cruel to them. And that led me to a career in the nonprofit world as an animal advocate. So I spent quite a long time working primarily as a lobbyist to try to enact laws that would help protect animals from abuse. That was enriching and gratifying career for me. But at the same time, I really started thinking around 2015 and 16 that maybe food technology was going to do even more than what I was doing. And so I thought it was important to pass laws to help protect animals, especially the animals who are raising for food, who are often treated in ways that are quite deplorable. Yet at the same time, it's very clear if you look at the history of how animals have been displaced in our economy in the past, it's usually not because of humane sentiment. It's because of new technologies. I'll give you a few examples. Think about how for millennia, we harpooned whales in order to light our homes with whale oil. Nobody stopped harpooning whales because they cared about whales. They stopped because kerosene was invented and it was a cheaper way to light our homes. And that decimated the whaling industry. Similarly, for millennia, we whipped horses to get around. Nobody stopped using horse-drawn carriages because they cared about horses. They stopped because cars were invented, or as we called them at the time, horseless carriages. And it was a better way to get around. For thousands of years, the best way we had to write anything down was with a quill that had been live plucked from a goose. Very inhumane to do, but nobody stopped because they cared about the geese. They stopped because metal fountain pens were invented, and it was a much better way to write than using a quill. And the list of these examples goes on and on and on. Over and over and over again, animals have been displaced in the economy, not because of humane sentiment, but only because of new inventions that rendered the old way of doing things obsolete. And so I started thinking, what could I do? Right. And I was like, look, I'm essentially a lobbyist. What could I possibly do to advance new inventions that might reduce our reliance on animals as a food source? And I thought at the time, I'm not some entrepreneur. I don't have an MBA. I'm not like a microbiologist or a food scientist. I don't have millions of dollars like a venture capitalist to invest. Like, what could I do? And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book. Maybe I'll write a book on this topic. And if I write a book and if the book succeeds, then maybe it'll inspire people who do have those relevant backgrounds to go and start their own companies or to go to work at those companies. And so it was a pretty hubristic thing to think about, like writing a book. I had never published a book before. But I thought, well, maybe I'll try my hand at this. And Justin, I got to say, like, I got very lucky. My book, which is called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World, got purchased by Simon & Schuster. And the book did better than I would have ever dreamt. It hit the Washington Post bestseller list. It was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, and PR reviewed it. Like, I just really caught lightning in a bottle. I got very lucky. And the book was very transformative in my own life. And in writing this book, which tells the stories of the entrepreneurs, the investors, the scientists who are all racing to commercialize the world's first slaughter-free meat, I came to realize that the people who were starting these companies weren't so different from me. I had previously thought of them as like these superheroes who had backgrounds that were uniquely fitting for them to go do this, which was different from me. But as I interviewed them for the book, I learned a lot of them were mere mortals like myself. In fact, some of them I thought had less experience than I did. And it became clear to me, like I had these founders up on a pedestal thinking that these were these people who were like demigods. And yet I'm like, well, actually, if these dummies can do it, maybe this dummy can do it too.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll write another book. But I decided instead of writing about the people who I thought were going to solve this problem that had animated my life for so long, how we're going to reduce humanity's reliance on animals for food, maybe instead of just writing about them, I'd become one of them. And so I ended up talking with a friend of mine. His name is Joanna Bromley. She does have a Harvard MBA and is experienced in startup land. And she was working at Bain as a management consultant at that point. She worked there for like 7 years. And I was like, hey, Joanna, why don't you quit your job at Bain and come move to Sacramento and start this company with me? And she's like, well, what's the name of the company? And I was like, well, I don't have a name for it yet, but here's the idea. And I told her the idea. And to her great credit, she quit her job at Bain and moved to Sacramento, and we started this company together.
Wow.
So that's really the genesis. That's how it got started. And now the company has been going strong for more than 8 years. And that's a very long time in startup land. As you know, Justin, most companies don't last even 3 to 5 years, let alone 8. And we're going strong. So we're going to keep working hard to become successful. I wouldn't call the company a success at this point. We still, which I would consider it a success once we really are, internationally sold, a profitable company, and so on. But right now, we're doing well with what we have. And we have a long way to go to achieve the mission of the company, which is to make a dent in this problem of how we're going to sustainably feed humanity into the future without destroying the rest of the planet in the process.
For those that aren't kind of in the vegan alternative meat world, how does this compare or differentiate from like a Beyond Meat? And I guess during your book kind of research, were you, because I mean, that was 2018, it looks like when you launched it. So that was around the time that Beyond was starting to actually become a thing. It was very expensive and may or may not have actually been on the market yet. I can't remember back that far long ago. But I guess first question is, were you interviewing the people that were starting like the Impossible Meat and Beyond Meat? And then how does it, is it similar, different, similar, the same as far as like the makeup of how it works?
Yeah, so Beyond Meat was, my guess would be it started probably around like 2012 or so, but their real rise began in the mid 2010s, like 2015 through 18 probably, and then that culminated in their 2019 IPO, which was a massively successful IPO. Now, all of that said, the way that Beyond Meat makes a burger is the following. You grow a field of peas. You harvest a field of peas. You mill that into a flour. Now you have a pea flour. But it's pretty low in protein. So you strip out the fiber, you strip out the fat, and you concentrate it down into a pea protein powder. That pea protein powder is what somebody might take as like a supplement for athletic performance or something like that. It's a good product, but it doesn't have the texture of meat. So now you got to extrude it. And that's a fancy way of saying lots of pressure and lots of heat. That changes the protein powder into a texturized pea protein granule. That texturized pea protein granule is like the hero ingredient, but it's not the only ingredient in a Beyond Burger. You need to add other ingredients to it as well. So that is really like the very brief genesis of how a Beyond Burger comes to be made. In the case of mycelium, it's very different. We aren't turning things into fractionates or isolates or extrudates. We're growing a whole food, all natural, single ingredient mycelium. And that single ingredient on its own, with no texturization process or stripping anything out of it, has an extremely meat-like texture. And it's very, very nutritious. And so it's not really the equivalent of using the whole pea. It's like the equivalent of using the entire pea plant, right? So like the roots, the leaves, the shoots, everything, right? Because all of that mycelium is our product. And so it's very different in that it's a very raw, unprocessed ingredient that you can use for lots of different purposes. And it's not just a protein. Like when you use pea protein powder or textured pea protein, like you're really just after that protein content. In our case, you're getting both protein and fiber. And the reality is that most people, despite the hype around protein, are not protein deficient, right? Like nearly nobody in America is protein deficient. But 9 out of 10 people in America are fiber deficient. 9 out of 10 people don't eat enough fiber. And so, the problem with fiber deficiency is pretty serious. It's not merely that it's associated with constipation, though that would be bad enough, but it's also things like colon cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and so on. Like it's really important to eat more fiber, and nearly nobody in America eats sufficient fiber. Well, here's the way you get the protein you want, but you also get the fiber that you need.
And so let's talk about more of the business side of this when you started it. So you convinced a probably well-paid Bain consultant to move across the country, quit her job, move across the country to start this business. As a lot of startups do, they have an idea, they raise some money, and they kind of go from there. How did you start the business? And then maybe where is it today? How many people do you have? Like, let's talk about kind of more of the business side of the deal.
Sure. So yeah, we needed money. So we agreed. So Joanna and I started the company along with a friend of ours named Adam Yee, who is a food scientist. And we agreed that we would spend a couple months trying to fundraise without paying ourselves. So we basically worked the first couple months as volunteers while we went out and tried to fundraise and see if there was an appetite for this type of a company in the market from investors. The first round that we did was a pre-seed round, and we were very gratified that we raised $1.6 million in 2018 in this pre-seed round. This was done on a SAFE, like a simple agreement for future equity. And it largely came from, like family, fools, and friends, right? So it's people who we personally knew who wanted to take a bet. I really think these people, like with all early stage investment, are generally betting on the jockey, not on the horse.
Yep.
And so I was glad to know people who thought that I would be a good jockey in this case. After that, though, we had to prove that we could actually do something. And that's when we really started doing the research on mycelium, how to grow mycelium. You're talking about farming wild microbes here. This is not like farming peas or soybeans or corn. where there's centuries of data on this. You're taking mycelium, this wild microbe that's never been commercially farmed, and figuring out how to grow it in a controlled environment. That is, deep tech. It's a hard thing to do. But we did it. We started getting patents on the work that we were doing and started figuring out ways to make the mycelium do the things that we wanted to do, have high protein, be very meat-like, grow very fast, and so on. At that point, we went back out to the market. This is now like over a year later. And we were able to raise a seed round of about $10 million at that point. This is coming now from not, friends, family, and fools, but now this is coming from like venture capital funds, right?
Yeah.
And from there, we continued to refine our portfolio of patents. We continued to advance our technology, but we got mired. We were mired in IP litigation. And so we were planning to raise a Series A pretty quickly after that seed round, like within a year or so. But we got mired in IP litigation where another company came after us, and we spent 3 years in federal court on this
Wow.
issue. Ultimately, a federal judge ruled in our favor. They ruled that all of the patents belonged to us, and our adversaries in that case ultimately went bankrupt, and their products are no longer on the market. But while we won the case, we won the war. I would say while we won the battle, right, which was the litigation and the dispute over the IP, it was very difficult for us to go for 3 years without fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And people just were not interested in funding the company when we had this cloud over us. Not only did that not want to put money in that was inevitably going to be paid to lawyers, but there was also a question mark as to whether we would even win or not, right?
Yeah.
The litigation is uncertain. So I'm very grateful that we won. I'm grateful that the judge saw the truth, which is that all the patents belong to us. But it was very difficult. But so, within a year after the litigation had ended, we did go out and raise our Series A round, which we raised about $31 million. And that was in 2025.
Okay.
And so now we're scaling up and we are getting ready to unleash a river in 2027 of our mycelium throughout the world.
Got it. And why did you not want to kind of, instead of being an ingredient company, be a Beyond Meat company where you're creating a product and you're trying to sell a specific product or line of products,
Yeah.
and actually just be in an ingredient that you can then sell to different people?
It's really hard as a startup to be good at lots of things. I always joke, like, you want to minimize the number of miracles that you need to perform.
Mm,
And it's one thing to invent new technology. That's a miracle. Then to be able to actually scale it up and produce what you did in the lab in a factory, that's another miracle. But then to also be good at, you know, marketing and packaging and slotting fees and like everything else that you have to do to build a brand. It's just, you could have a great product and great technology and still fail because you sucked at these other things. So I wanted to minimize the risk and get us to a place. Now, of course, CPG brands are going to have a higher margin than B2B ingredients, but we spread our bet out. If we're selling to 5 CPG brands and 3 of them go under, we still have 2 customers left who are still doing it. Whereas,
yep.
we could have been one of those ones who went under. So the history of trying to launch new CPG brands is one that's like a graveyard. And so obviously there are examples that we know of or companies succeeded in doing it, but those are the real anomalous ones, not the ones that are the norm. Now, for our path, it's also not the norm to succeed. Most startups fail, obviously. But I wanted to increase the chance of our success. And I thought by spreading out our bets, by creating this new ingredient, we could do that. We have something that is extremely unique, an unbelievable new crop for humanity, right? Humanity eats very few crops. It's like wheat and soy and rice and very few animals, like cows, chickens, and pigs, and so on. We have a new crop. It's not an animal. It's not a plant. It's microbial fungi. Its nutrition is absolutely incredible. One of the healthiest things you could possibly eat. And it should be available for lots of companies to use. We would like to be able to sell to, let's say, General Mills and to Unilever and so on, and let them, who have far more experience than we do at marketing finished food products, put that out into the world.
Yeah. So we're recording this kind of mid-year 2026. You obviously mentioned that you're kind of going to be launching this into the market and all that fun stuff in 2027. I guess, what are you going to need to achieve between now and the end of the year to kind of, be on track, and how big is the team, all that?
Sure. So with regard to your question about the team size, sorry, I neglected to answer that before. It's 18 people who work here.
Okay.
Now, there's 18 employees. It's a pretty small company. But we're trying to have a frugal, tight belt company that can not spend too much burning while we're
Hmm.
building. And so we've already invented the technology. It's already in the market now, but we can't produce enough. Right
Okay.
now, demand vastly exceeds supply. We turn down orders. Right now, at our Sacramento fermentation facility, all of the purchase orders for the rest of 2026 have already come in. Like we can't produce. If you, Justin, said right now, hey, I want to buy from you, I'd tell you, hey, man, wait until next year because we cannot produce more. We need much bigger fermenters. So that's what we're doing now is building much much bigger opportunities for us in order to supply much larger volumes of mycelium into the market. That's a major construction project for us. It involves a lot of capital expenditures, but we're not doing it alone and we're not operating greenfield. We're doing a retrofit onto an already existing facility. And that dramatically reduces the capex burden on our own company.
So this is not like growing mushrooms in a dark closet or something like that. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it than, just walking out in the
Yeah.
forest and seeing mycelium and be like, oh, I'll just pick that and grow it and all that fun stuff. So what does it take to grow enough to do what you want to do? Like how big do you need big, factories, warehouses, holes in the ground that you just like throw a bunch of fungi spores in? Like how does it work?
No, definitely not. Think, Justin, about a beer brewery.
Okay.
Right. So they put microbes in those fermenters there, right? They have big stainless steel fermenters. They put microbes in there. It's the microbes that we colloquially call brewer's yeast, but it's a yeast. It's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast. And they put that in there and they ferment that yeast and the end product is beer. Similarly, we take microbes and we put them in very similar stainless steel fermenters. And the end product, though, we're not growing alcohol, we're growing protein. So, but it's very similar in that it's, you have a stainless steel fermenter that's filled up with water. You introduce your microbes into it and you feed them. Just like in beer production, you feed them sugar from the grain, right? From that barley. Well, in our case, we're feeding them sugar from corn and they eat that. The microbes eat that sugar inside of that fermenter and they grow. And then we harvest them and we eat them. So it's kind of like if you imagine a farm, except instead of a barn of chickens, you have a fermenter of microbes and you want them to grow fast and you want them to grow big, just like you would with chickens. And that's what we're doing. We're farming microbes.
Got it. Fascinating. So if you did it wrong, you may you may have beer. Is that like the
I,
oops? You
I,
may.
yeah, actually, you would have a lot of ethanol if you did it wrong. That's true.
Got it.
So different microbes produce different things, right? Just like there's lots of animal species, different plant species. There's lots of different fungal species, and different microbes produce different things. I mean, think about it. Like right now, when you make bread, you have to put what we again colloquially call baker's yeast in the bread, right? That's a microbe. You put that in the bread and it eats the sugar in that wheat and it excretes CO2, carbon dioxide. That's why the bread rises. That's why it
Mm,
bubbles in bread because of the CO2 from the yeast. That's why if you don't put baker's yeast in there, the bread doesn't rise. So that in that case, you have a microbe that produces CO2. In the case of beer, you have a microbe that's producing alcohol. In our case, we have a microbe that is creating mycelium, right? Or this very protein rich fungi. And so most people are not accustomed to thinking about the microbial world, even though we use microbes all the time in our food and drinks and so on. But what we're doing is doing it in a different way. Instead of trying to use it to make bread or alcohol, we're doing it to grow protein.
interesting. Um, I know you're not well, I guess you are kind of a technology company, but not in the Silicon Valley tech way, I think. Have you implemented or used AI in your business to be able to test different processes faster, or are you using it as a CEO to make better decisions, faster decisions, et cetera? Like, how are you kind of utilizing AI in your business?
Well, I mean, it's so transformative. I'm using it dozens of times a day, everything from small to big. And I'll give you an example. Yeah, of course, look, we're a deep technology company, but we're running fermentations. And fermentations, you're learning about the growth of this organism, how it does what it does. And there's so many different levers that you can pull from pH, temperature, flow rate, oxygen. I mean, feedstock, all these different things And like I said, there's not some path, there's not some printed literature out there on how to do what we're doing. We're really cutting a new path through the jungle here. And having AI be able to analyze our fermentations and recognize certain patterns is very helpful for us. But yeah, I use it for everything from our, when we're trying to trademark things or when we're doing investor relations and I want to try to calculate quickly just a, basic dilution on a proposed investment. I mean, it's hardly, 30 minutes goes by that I'm not using it in some way.
Yeah. Are you able to run like simulations on what's the best combination of things to, instead of having to try, test and fail on different things, just to be like, here, run a million simulations and give me the best outcome and then do that. Obviously it's much harder than that, but
We aspire to do that. We're working towards that. It requires a lot of data to be fed in, but at the same time, it would save enormous amounts of time and money if you could actually do that. Right now, we are not there yet, but we're working on it.
yeah. And as you scale production, you mentioned you're retrofitting an existing facility. Is that another facility in the Sacramento area? Or are you looking at other locations throughout the country / world to, continue to scale your production?
California is a pretty bad place to do manufacturing. It's very expensive. The regulations are pretty onerous. But we assessed 42 different locations looking around for the best place for us to do it. We were a part of the U.S. Department of Defense's program on biomanufacturing in the United
Hmm.
States, in which we were getting some funding from the DoD to do proof of concept on biomanufacturing. We succeeded in that program, and we were then applying to go further. So there was a second part of the program for companies that succeeded in the first part to actually get funds to actually build a factory, right? To not just proof of concept, but to build a factory in the United States. Unfortunately, the Trump administration canceled that part of the program. And so we were not able to build the factory in the United States. So we're now building it in Asia, where the incentives were much greater for us.
Got it. And then would you get hit with tariffs on the import back for, or is Asia an interesting market for you to sell into, and so you just keep it local, or both, I
We
guess?
will be, yeah, both. That's right. We will be selling in Asia for sure, and we will pay the tariffs that are maybe in place when that comes out. It's hard to tell what the tariff regime may look like at that point, or in 2027. That's a very far way away.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even if the tariffs are 50%, the cost differential is so massive between trying to build this in the United States and building it in Asia. The tariffs don't affect our decision.
Yeah. Is this a labor intensive process, or is it more the sheer size of the facility that you need to hit the demand on what you're kind of getting in?
It's capital intensive to build these types of facilities because it's a lot of stainless steel. There is labor that is part of it, but the biggest cost is the feedstock. So basically, we run this on corn. So we're basically feeding corn to the microbes. And so in that case, the price of corn really
Mm,
is going to dramatically alter what the cost for our final good is. But yeah, there's some utility costs, there's some labor costs, and obviously the labor costs are much cheaper in Asia than here in the United States. But the real difference is just the cost to build,
yeah.
right? Like, and the cost to build here is prohibitive.
So if you had your ideal scenario happen in the next, call it 3 to 5 years, where do you want the Better Meat Co. to be? What would be success look like to you, other than continuing to be in business, which is a piece of success all in itself? But I guess from a more holistic, more humane view, where would you like the business and maybe mycelium as an ingredient to be in the market?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe where
So
where do you think it can be? I guess let's maybe first start with
mhm.
realistic and then maybe ideal.
I like talking about what I hope rather than what I predict
Okay.
because so many of my predictions in life have been wrong. Um, Now, here's the deal. Like you said, being around for another 5 years for a startup, that's a big deal, right? Most
Yep.
startups fail. So that's a big deal. I do think that this company, though, has a chance to reach escape velocity, meaning becoming profitable and create a company that can profitably put a dent in the number of animals who are used for food. Just in the same way that kerosene helped free whales from harpoons, just in the same way that the horseless carriage helped free whips, free horses from whips. I think that what we can do is prevent the need for so many slaughterhouses and factory farms for animals. What that means is creating an ingredient that is not just going to be a niche ingredient, but an ingredient that becomes a global commodity. And it does such a better job of helping mimic the meat experience for people than the current options do, that you'll see mycelium more as a food category. Right now, people think about eating animals and they think about eating plants. Even though mycelium has been in the human diet for centuries, most people don't think of it. They maybe haven't even heard of the word. But mycelium is a delicious, nutritious, all natural ingredient, and it should be a bigger place in our diets for sure. And so I think that 5 years from now, we should have a river of mycelium flowing from multiple Better Meat Co. fermentation facilities, hopefully one in the United States, where we can create the conditions for food companies to not be so reliant on animals as a food source.
I love it. I think that's a good place to kind of wind things down here as we end the episode. I've got a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. First question here is, what's an influential book or podcast that you would recommend, other than the one that you wrote yourself, maybe?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll take a cheat answer on this and say the book I wrote, which is called Queen Meat, is a good one, I'm told. But I also will recommend a podcast that I host, which is called the Business for Good podcast, which features companies that are making money by doing good things in the world. So check out Business for Good podcast. But to recommend something that is not my own work, I would say the following. There's a novel. It's a sci-fi dystopian novel called Tender is the Flesh. The author's name is Agostina Bazterrecka. And this novel is so good. It's a short novel. It's a great thought experiment about these issues that we are talking about right now. And if you are into sci-fi or just, thought-provoking literature, read Tender is the Flesh. It is quite excellent.
Fascinating. I will have to check that out.
Awesome. Yeah. I when I read it, I thought, man, this is so good. And I was like, God, I wish I would have written this. It's so good. It's so good. She really wrote a great book.
Awesome. I'll check that out. All right. Second question here. What is your favorite thing to do outside of work?
Oh, I'm such a boring dude, Justin. I hang out with my wife and my dog. So my wife and I go to the gym and I walk my dog, and I live right by the Sacramento River. And so I let him run around on there. I take him there and I just let him loose, and he goes in the river. He's a 60-pound pit bull, and he just romps up and down the banks of the Sacramento River, racing around. He has such a great time. He's just like, he's on, actually, you want to see him, he's on Instagram. He's Eddie the Pitty. It's EDDIE, the PITTIE. So Eddie the Pitty. If you want to see a dog having a blast with his life, go check out Eddie the Pitty on Instagram. He's so much fun.
That's awesome. I'll check that out. All right, last question here. Favorite vacation spot?
Oh, I like going to the beach. I don't have a real desire to ever be like in urban environments. Like people are like, oh, let's go to Paris or London. I'm like, well, I just see a bunch of like buildings that people built centuries ago. So it doesn't really do much for me. So my preference would be like anywhere where there's a beach where I can like hang out with my wife and read. I'm so boring, Justin. I'm like, I like do like nothing really that cool. I like hang out with my wife, go to the gym, read, write. That's pretty much my life.
And you're a podcaster and you're a startup entrepreneur. I mean, those are pretty cool things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'm grateful for all of that. Yeah. And I have another book coming out later this year too, but I'll tell you more about that some other time.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on and promote the book for sure. Paul, it's been awesome. If people want to learn more about you, the business, what you're up to, what mycelium is, how to do it, what's the best way to connect with you?
Oh, just visit our website. It's bettermeat.co. Again, bettermeat.co, and get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. So please be in touch and email us, and I'll love to get back to you.
Awesome. Paul, it's really great to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you being a guest.
Hey, thanks so much, Justin. It was a real fun time talking with you.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.